This is the best market we've ever had. I just don't know how better to say it.
Clint Berry is back with us as we recap the results from the latest Superior Videos sale, and we'll talk about the tone that it set as we look ahead to the summer sales and the fall run in a market like we've never seen before. Are we seeing any sign of herd retention? Is there the return on adding value to your calves in this type of a market, whether it's through various marketing programs to weaning, and how should you view those types of management decisions?
Don't let the marketing drive the management.
Plus, a stark warning about sitting in the middle of either selling your calves all natural or using the technology available to add weight to your calves.
You can't do neither. Neither is the only wrong answer.
And we'll talk about what's the best value in the market, and we'll wrap it up with his conclusion to this response.
Probably my biggest concern is...
That's on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, your host. Thanks for joining us here on the program today. A great subject at hand when we're talking about record high prices today that we're going to get into here in just a moment. But before we do that, I did want to let you know that later on in the show, as we always do, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's Two Cents, as well as meteorologist Don Day in with a look at our long-term weather. By the way, I wanted to mention next week coming up on the show, Alan Crockett will be joining us. He's been a regular guest as well, so be sure to tune in next week. Now, I also wanted to mention the latest issue, the summer edition of Working Ranch Magazine is out. It's actually been out for a couple of weeks, but as always, boy, it's always full of a lot of great articles, very informative, very educational. If you don't have it, you're missing out. It's pretty easy to get your subscription started by going to workingranchmag.com. Well, let's turn towards our subject at hand now, and joining us today is Mr. Clint Berry with Superior Livestock out of San Angelo, Texas. And Clint, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Oh, you're most welcome, Justin. Glad to be here, be a part, and glad to get a chance to visit.
You bet. So how are things going? I know last time we talked to you, I think it was back in February, you had just made the move from Dallas or south of Dallas there to back in the home country, and how are you liking being back in the home country?
Yeah, it's nice. I moved to San Angelo, which is kind of in the south central part of Texas, and a little closer to my folks' place. They've got a ranch just north of here, about 75 miles. And it's just kind of nice to get back to a little smaller town too. Dallas-Fort Worth is a unique place, but boy, there's a lot of people. I just tell you, but the metro is home to like 6 or 7 million people. That's a lot of folks. So
yeah, the older we get, the more we just kind of like to be a little bit more away from all that activity, huh?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, it's a crazy deal. Perspective, you know, in life is a little different. I graduated high school from a town with, you know, maybe about 1,100 people, and I moved to a town to go to college, Springfield, Missouri, and moved up there, and there was about 100,000 people there, and I thought it was the biggest city in the world. And then this year I moved to San Angelo, and San Angelo's right at about 100,000, and I'm telling you, it's like moving back to a small town again after leaving the metro.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about this market. I bring you on from time to time throughout each year as we kind of get a projection of where we think this market's going. I know in your business and line of work that you do, you handle an awful lot of cattle. You talk to a lot of different guys all across the country. And so recently, Superior Livestock had their Corn Belt Classic back the second week of June there, and we'll get into that just a little bit, because I think for a lot of us, we're just wondering where this, you know, where the market's going to go. We know it's a good market, so we're there. But we've got some other factors that I want to talk a little bit about. And generally across the country, as you and I were kind of chatting a little bit before we went on air, I said, are you kind of in that dry area of southwestern Texas? And you said you weren't so much, but there are areas. And so, you know, kind of what are you hearing across the country as far as moisture levels? Because I think the reason I ask for that is because that also plays in a part of, you know, the hay production that we're going to have. Hay production and feed costs being a major cost to many producers. Therefore, we're talking profitability at the end of it. So what are you hearing across the country as far as conditions that, you know, it's going to be affecting ranchers?
You know, and I don't know that this is really any different than any other year, but it's a mixed bag from different folks you talk to. You know, I've got customers that are cussing the mud. I've got customers that said it hadn't rained in months. I've got people that are enjoying probably one of the best moisture years they've had. I just shipped some cattle in Oklahoma yesterday, and they said they've had enough moisture and enough grass. He said between the grass they got left and the hay they had left over from the mild winter, said we could get by without cutting a single bale of hay this year, putting up any hay. So, I mean, I hear different things from different folks. I know I've got some customers and friends in Montana, and they're drier than where they need to be, but nothing like it was drought a few years back. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But if you really boil it down, I mean, for the most part, we're in pretty good shape as a whole. Yeah, I would expect solid hay production and forage. So I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape when it comes to that for the vast majority of folks.
So we talked back in February, it was episode 156, as we just kind of recapped a little bit about what Cattle Facts had predicted the market to look like for 2024, in addition to looking at years later past 2024. So as we find ourselves now here in June and looking at this market, you just recently had the Corn Belt Classic in June 10th through the 11th, kind of a good test of where this market is at and starting to maybe a pace setter for where this market's going to be at. Just generally observing that before we'll jump into the details of some of that, but just generally looking at that, what was your general thoughts coming out of the Corn Belt Classic?
Excitement, and that market was even stronger than anticipated going in. I'll tell you what, Justin, and it's not going to be this way on every single set of cattle, of course. We are painting with a pretty wide brush, but this is the best market we've ever had. Yeah, that's just, I just don't know how better to say it. We can look back and remember 13 and 14, and most of the metrics that we have we're better than that. I mean, it's an excellent market, and I think it's going to be a much more prolonged market rather than the short-term deal, because as of right now, I know we're going to talk about this a little later, but as of right now, there's just not much herd expansion going on. And so the shortage of supply is going to drive most of that pressure. That leverage is in the producer side. Yeah. And I don't anticipate that either. We've seen a lot of heifer calves get sold, not a lot of retention in that the last year. And of course, we don't know yet any indication as you saw this Corn Belt Classic. Did you see less heifers being put out there on the sale block, or, I mean, any indication that there's going to keep keeping any of that just from that sale? And I know that's a pretty early mark to be looking at, but any thought on that? Yeah, and you're right. The Corn Belt historically, and it is again this year, but historically, it's a snapshot of what's to come over the summer, because it's at least in the Superior system, the Corn Belt sale right there, first half of June every year. That is the first time that we have a large abundance of cattle for sale that are going to have a fall delivery. We've sold a lot of cattle from the start of the year to now, but most of those were for a much more immediate delivery time frame. Most of those cattle have been shipped. This is and it followed suit again this year. This is one of the first big auctions with cattle that are going to be shipped in September, October, November, and even December. And so it's a snapshot of what's to come as we move into the later summer sales. To answer your question on the females, from what I saw, there's absolutely no pressure on retention. So when we sell the cattle, we sell steer lots and heifer lots when it comes to calves. And feeders, we break them out different. But when we're selling wean cattle and balling calves, cattle off cows, we sell a customer steers and we sell customers heifers. Most of the time it's like an AB lot or multiple lots if there's multiple ones. And a lot of those lots matched up basically head count for head count, load for load. Yep. Which is a clear indication nobody's really keeping any big number of cattle. Yeah. Yep. And the prices paid will reflect that too. There's just no replacement pressure on heifers at this point. Yeah. Yep. So which means there's still a pretty good hefty discount in them. It sounds to me like then. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Okay. Well, Clint, let's take a break here because when we come back, I want to start diving into what we saw out of that as we're going to look at the different classes of mainly these calves, the fall delivery type calves. As we work through our program here today, folks, we'll get into the bred cow market and talk some other things with this market in general. Also, maybe some concerns in the industry that folks are watching
as well. So when we come back, we're going to start diving into the recap and look at the Corn Belt Classic, break it down by the different classes, steers, heifers, and also program type cattle and how they sold. So stick with us. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show as we continue to look at this market. My guest today is Clint Berry out of San Angelo, Texas, a representative for Superior Livestock. And we're just going to spend this segment kind of recapping a little bit about what happened at the Corn Belt Classic and maybe even rehashing a little bit about where the market could be looking at. Of course, we got some big sales for Superior coming up in July with a week in the Rockies, July 8th through the 12th, Video Royale, that's the end of July, first part of August as well. So definitely those are going to be where we see a big jag of cattle going through that are going to be fall delivery cattle on this, Clint. So when we let's kind of jump into this, and I know, folks, as we talk about this, that we got a lot of different types and regions in the country, and so let's start with the steers just in general, Clint. You know, from a broad overview, kind of your view of where that steer market landed after that Corn Belt Classic.
Yeah, that and you got to be careful when you're evaluating some of the data, and it would be this way with any video auction, but because some of the numbers are going to be for cattle that are fall deliveries, some of the numbers are going to be for cattle that are immediate deliveries, but they may show up in the same report. You know, when you say you're selling a 6 to 650 pound calf, you can have all of the above in that. It can be a calf that's going to ship next week, and it can be a calf that's going to ship in October. And then in addition to that, when we're talking about calves and those lower weights, we'll also have balling calves mixed in with wean cattle. So sometimes those get confusing, but overall a really strong market. I mean, you know, in that region 2 market, we sold 5 weights ranging anywhere from 317 to 353, you know, lightweight 5 weight cattle. That's from the region 2, which would be basically the northern central part. You know, that's Utah, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, and Kansas or Nebraska, kind of area. So you move into the 6 weights and they're going to range from, you know, 280s to 320s, you know, that kind of a deal. And then, you know, you get a little heavier than that, and, you know, you're still talking about selling cattle from, you know, the 6.5 to 700s are going to be 260s to 330s, and the 7 to 750 weights were, you know, $2.75 to $3. So, I mean, pretty strong prices for cattle that are out there. You go to look at the heifers, you're going to see them back of the value of the steers, because you have to remember, you know, and I have a lot of customers that'll say, well, they're the same thing. You know, a heifer is the same thing out of the cow herd. They're bred the same bulls. They got the same genetics. And that's true as a seller of cattle. That is true. You know, that is a good point. The same genetics are in those cattle. But a steer and a heifer is a different animal when it's put on feed. There's just a different performance level that happens there. And the reality is that your best heifer is still an average or to below average feeder when it comes in terms of evaluating them that way. You know, the steers are going to outperform the heifers. Now, one guy's heifers might outperform another guy's steers, but the same guy's steers and heifers, the steers are going to outperform the heifers. They're going to hang more weight. They're going to have a higher conversion, and they're going to gain better. That's just the way that it works. Not necessarily hanging better. The carcass quality will be adequate and equal, but the production side of it is what's so much more. And so when you see those heifers priced 10, 15, 20, 25 back, you know, and somewhere in there is that sweet spot. I would tell a guy that's selling calves this year that you can pretty much expect your heifers are going to be valued at 15 to 20 back of whatever your steers are. And some guys are going to do better than that, and some guys are going to do worse. But that's, you know, that would be a fair number that I would throw out there and say that's the kind of the number I talk to my customers about, you know, when looking at what we're expecting, because that's a clear indication that there's just no replacement value out there being, or replacement pressure being put on those cattle at this time. That's how I should say it. I shouldn't say no value. I just no pressure,
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. Clint, it sounded to me like in the last sales, some of these bigger, heavier calves sold really well because they were trying to hit that April market, into next year, and a heavier calf was going to get them there a little bit quicker. So as we progress, your advice to somebody, looking at marketing these calves, whether they're going to go video or whether they're going to hold and hit the fall run and go to a sale barn, what would be your thoughts or perspective on that as we look at our weight of calves, anybody calving starting in March all the way through May, June?
Yeah. My first response is always, don't muddy the water. Don't make this too complicated.
Okay.
And I tell my customers all the time, don't let the marketing drive the management. We will build a marketing program around your management. And when I say management, that's everything involved. That's breed type and genetics and whether you're weaning or not weaning and what time of year you're calving. And because all those factors make a lot more money than worrying about how to capture 2, 4, 6, 8, even $10 a hundredweight in the market. The marketing side of that part is that's the side dish to the main course. The main course is what's profitable on your ranch and in your operation under your labor skills and availability. How does that work best for you? And so if it works for you to produce 6-weight calves, because that's the time of year that's what your cows are going to produce on a normal year. That's the best time to be calving and breeding cows for the success rates that you need. If those things are what's laying out there, don't let what a 6-weight's bringing affect you the same, because most of us are not going to go back and magically change that and all of a sudden start making 7.5 weights or 5 weights. We're not going to change to that degree. The other side of what's driving that difference is exactly what you said. Like you talked about hitting the April market. Well, in general, the April live cattle market, the fat market, is the highest throughout the year. Now, we have some instances where that doesn't happen, and we have a lot of times, like even right now is a prime example, like the difference between the February contract and the June contract versus the April contracts. I mean, you're only talking $6 to $7, $5 to $7, depends on which ones you're looking at. There's been times I've seen that be $10 or $12. So, I mean, there are differences, but the point is that time of year, there's 2 factors that play into why cattle are bringing what they're bringing. One of them is the buyer's perception that those cattle are going to finish in the right dead month for them, the month that they're anticipating the most value, which is typically an April market. But so you'll have pressures at certain times on a 6-weight that was on a 7-weight that was on a 5-weight because they're shooting for that dead time market. The other side of it is what's available out there. That's simple supply and demand. If you're marketing at the livestock market and they've got a run of 3,500 cattle at the market and 2,800 of them range from 575 to 675, that's pretty much flooding the market with a weight range.
Yeah.
And that's going to have a pressure point on the buyers in their favor. So part of that is the timing that we sell cattle, and there's just an abundance of those. So those are factors that play in there. But for the most part, everything works backwards from a break even. So when a buyer's targeting a set of cattle, he's going to have projections on how he believes those cattle are going to perform and what month they're going to die in. And that's going to set up the start of his break even. And then he can price that backwards minus the expenses and death loss and what he's anticipating to come up with that value. And sometimes the difference in weight is a huge difference. And remember, nobody can put weight on cattle cheaper than a cattle feeder. I mean, that they do it, that's what they do for a living. So they're going to evaluate that cost of gain is going to be in their favor compared to most other people that are trying to do that not on forage, just because economy of scale.
Yeah. You mentioned something there and it just made me kind of really revert back to a little bit of our conversation we had in the first segment. And I know it is way, way, way too early to tell right now because there's a lot of things that can happen, but that feed element that plays a part in some of this. The Midwest has been doing pretty good on moisture this year, which is evidence that we could have a pretty decent corn crop. gives a little bit more reinforcement to these guys as far as the feeder side of things, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you look out at corn contracts and all of them have 4s in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that long ago. They all had high 5s, and we all remember 8s and 6s. And, so, I mean, the projected production goes back to just what you were saying. We talk about hay production and forage production. Well, corn and crop production is going to play into it too for the feed sources. So, yeah, I mean, that looks really good. Probably the one factor out there that I think all of us would agree doesn't look good at this time is interest on our money. This costs more to operate, even just from that side part of it. That is part of the cost of gain. That's the truth.
Yep. It adds another, boy, I mean, we're double to where we were a few years ago. So, yeah. But, all right, let's take another break here, Clint. When we come back, I want to stay on this fed market just a little bit more, because we have yet to really talk about program cattle, what we're seeing with the value there. Also, I want to talk about the price difference between a ball-in calf and a weaned calf. We'll get into that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Before we head out, this segment brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective, adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with grass-based livestock producers in mind. Find out more by going to their website at k-linena.com.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Clint Berry, as we are recapping a little bit and then also kind of talking projecting-wise of where this cattle market's going to be at as we look through these summer months and into the big fall run and anticipating what that's going to look like. As Clint said earlier, coming out of that Corn Belt Classic, a lot of optimism in this market. We see that. And so, Clint, as we talked in the last segment, we were kind of giving some price breaks and having discussion on where these feeder, just in general, feeder steers and feeder heifers were at. We didn't really get into more of the details inside of those markets. And I know at this point in time, we start talking, okay, well, is it worth it for me to wean calves? Is it worth it for me to sell ball-in calves? And we start to analyze that just a little bit. And so when we look at that, and that'll lead us maybe into where we're seeing with program cattle and things like that, just in general, when we start to then dive into this a little bit deeper and how folks are marketing their calves, what are you seeing there? Let's start with these weaned calves and ball-in calves, and we're ways out from really of seeing a good hard test on that market. But I mean, just your general observation.
Well, and keep it simple is an important part here. Just think about when you're given $1,000 or $1,200 for an animal, you want all the value you can capture out of them, and that gets even at a higher rate when you start giving $1,700, $1,800, $1,900, $2,000 for animals. The price of vaccines haven't increased in that kind of degree, and so the little things we do add a lot of value, and it only carries over when they get to this standpoint. I mean, when you're paying that kind of money for animals, you expect to have some things in place. And the thing that I tell everybody, unfortunately, when a market gets hot, when a market really gets exciting and we're short on supply, the gap between the value added components, whether that's extra vaccinations, weaning, genetics, program management, third-party verifications, that value stays. There's still value in all those practices, but it narrows. No different than, you can watch high quality cattle and average quality cattle, and the high quality cattle are going to outsell them, but the margin between them in a short supply narrows. The gap between that value, it's still there. And I still think we need to do everything we can to capture all the value we can. Plus, we're always thinking about building repeat buyers
Yeah.
of our cattle. So those things all play out, but it does narrow. So when we start talking, like you talked about ball wean cattle versus wean cattle, there's still a ton of value for having wean cattle. And when we say weaned, that's 45, 60 days or longer. That's not 15 days and then we're hauling them to town or something. That's not a wean calf. But when we're talking about weaning, that value is still there. And looking at the rough numbers, it's a little hard to compare because there's just so much data out there. But I'm going to tell you, it's still at least 10, 100 weight, something like that. It's more on certain cattle and less on others. And in some cases, you can prove me wrong. We'll sell a set of balling calves for a higher amount than a set of wean cattle sold that were comparable cattle. That does happen. Most of the time, that's reputation. That's a repeat buyer putting pressure on those. But in general, rule of thumb, that I would say that we're still probably looking somewhere in that $8, $10, $12 a hundredweight range for having balling calves. But I go back to the conversation we had in the other segment. Part of that conversation that the producers need to have within their own family and their team is the management side of that. Are we ready to actually commit to weaning cattle, especially in a market that's good? Do we do a good job weaning? Number one, I've got guys that can put 2 pounds of gain or more on a wean calf every day. Well, that's pretty good return on your money, even if the cattle brought the same amount of money on a per pound basis selling on sale day. That's a lot of value, especially when we're selling, 3 to 350 hundredweight cattle. That's a lot of money. I've got other guys that are just frankly, they're terrible at it. They'll wean a calf, and at 60 days, he might weigh 15 pounds more than he did before. That guy should never wean. I don't care if it's $20 a hundredweight. It's not worth it, And then we all have to deal with stuff like the, moisture and forage and availability. And then we have life that plays into it. We've got family members sick, or we're short on labor, or we've got a note to pay and it's time to market and cash in. All those factors play in, but the reality is keep it simple. If you're doing stuff to add value to your cattle, that's adding value for the buyer, and that will return money, probably 99 times out of 100. So those are things that I just tell everybody that they have to evaluate on their own. If you're not set up to wean cattle, then you probably shouldn't wean cattle. If you're set up to wean cattle, I don't care what the market's doing, you're going to make more money weaning cattle because your cattle are going to be heavier. But you have to be able to put weight on them. You cannot wean cattle and not put weight on them. That's the only rule of thumb that never changes, whether we're selling $1 cattle or $4 cattle. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, I think you did a good job of explaining that the management side of this and understanding your costs are something you really have to think about when you're weaning. So, because everybody thinks they want to do a weaning calf. And of course, all the buyers, they'd rather have a wean calf, probably, really, in reality. As long as they're weaned right,
Yeah. So, no buyer wants a balling. Nobody wants to deal with a balling calf. They would much rather have wean cattle. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're willing to pay for that. Yeah. But at certain times, but everybody wants a wean, especially when you're dealing with, like, we're going to talk about program cattle. You start dealing with natural cattle that are completely out of the program. If they ever have to be hit with an antibiotic, well, the wean cattle have a huge, and that's the reason that the feeder cattle have such a huge premium when they're naturals, is because a lot of that risk is taken out. So those are all simple management factors that play in, but the rule of thumb is the more you do, the more they're worth. It's just sometimes the markets get to where they're disguising that value because of how hot or how cold it is.
Yeah. Let's jump into these program cattle a little bit. We've kind of dabbled in it a bit in some ways of our conversation about wean calves or balling calves. I know in some of the results that I was looking at, and not to downplay these types of programs, but boy, the value in some of the gap stuff wasn't quite there that we'd seen in previous years. But again, I'm not saying it's a good or bad one way or the other. And as you had explained, that market kind of, the gap sort of shortens up a little bit between these program cattle and cattle that aren't sold without that. But as you look through that, is there any takeaways or any thoughts you have on some of the program type cattle that were sold?
Yeah, that value is still there, but that value narrows in an up market, of course, like what we were saying earlier. And the highest price per hundredweight cattle that are going to sell are still going to have multi-layered third-party verifications. But that margin, that spread, that difference between them and what we would call a conventional calf narrows when we have supply issues like we do right now. And so it's, for me, it goes back to the decisions of your management. If you're set up to do it that way, and especially if you're, if you're just carrying over your paperwork and you're already in that process, I wouldn't change it because the premium's not as wide as what it is in 2 years ago or whatever it may be, because you're still going to push the top of the market. And the nice thing about selling program cattle is everybody can buy the program cattle. Conventional guys can buy them.
Yeah.
I sent some natural gap cattle yesterday to a buyer that is feeding for some programs, but he's not feeding for that one. But he was still the winning bidder on those cattle. There's, so it doesn't always. They don't always, just because you put them in the programs doesn't mean they're always going to stay in them all the way out. And when they're harvested, they're not always harvested into one program. Some of them might go natural, some of them might go gap, some of them might go export. I mean, it varies as what's happening on the other end, but the value's still there. But it is going to narrow.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to see $25 a hundredweight gap cattle over conventional comparable cattle. That number's not going to be as high as what we've seen in the past, but it will be there.
Yeah. So then that leads me to the next point in this, and that is, if we're not going to be in these programs, we do need to utilize the technology that we have available in our industry to put pounds on these calves.
Yeah, I couldn't stress that anymore. And in a time like this, it even is more glaring. The one analogy that I use when I'm talking to customers is every operation is going to have to, think through this on their own and make their own decisions on what they want to do and to what degree of third-party verification they want to do. Because remember, it's like a ladder. There's multiple steps. So, some people only utilize the first couple of rungs. Some people utilize 3 and 4 levels of steps. So it just depends on what you want to do in your operation. But when we're selling $3 cattle, you need to think through the weight, because that does make a big difference. If you're set up to be naturals and you're going to be naturals, you need to go that way and verify it that way. If you're not, that's fine too. But just what you said, the analogy is a railroad track. You can walk down the left side and you can walk down the right side. Neither one of them is the wrong decision. But if you walk down the middle, you're going to get run over eventually. And that's what I tell guys. If you're not going to use the technology that we have, so if you're not using ionophores in your weaning rations or in your supplementation, or you're not using implants in the ears of the cattle to put some extra weight on them before they leave the ranch, then you need to verify that you're not doing that kind of stuff and get involved in these programs to try to capture it. You can't do neither. Neither is the only wrong answer.
Yeah.
Or go the other way and don't do the verifications and worry about those practices. Maybe find some verifications for cattle that don't require that if you want to be involved in those programs. And there's some good ones out there, like the Beef Care program and the agent source programs and stuff. But do one or the other. And that's a decision that each place is going to have to make on their own. The worst thing you can do is not be utilizing implants and ionophores, but then also not verifying your cattle for that and marketing them into that type of scenario where you can try to capture some premiums for that. That's the only wrong answer. And I go back to what I said earlier about weaning. That doesn't matter if it's a $1 calf market or a $4 calf market. That decision is always there. So you need to do one or the other, in my opinion. I strongly support that.
Yeah. The analogy I've used a lot of times is you'll burn the crotch out of your pants walking down the middle of the fence.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
So, all right, Clint Berry's my guest today. When we come back, we're going to talk about this bread market, where we see that going from where we were at in the winter months, and now as we it's kind of the softer time of the year for this bread market a bit, but we'll talk about that because it'll be heating up as we get into the fall run as well. We'll get into that when we come back here on the Workin' Ranch Radio Show. Before we head out, this segment brought to you by Cow Puncher Coffee. It's what we drink here at the Workin' Ranch Radio Show, as well as right here on the X-Ring Ranch. Choose from several different varieties and flavors of coffee that they have. I kind of like a little stouter version. That's what I drink. You can give Jim or Trish a call. Check them out online at cowpunchercoffee.com. They'll help you out if you need it as well. Grab a mug and let's spur the day with Cow Puncher Coffee. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Clint Berry out of San Angelo, Texas. He's a representative for Superior Livestock. We've been recapping this market a little bit, anticipating or talking about what we will be anticipating as we move into the summer runs and the big fall run as well. We're talking now about the bread market, and at break there, Clint, you said something about the head scratcher in this right now is the bread market. Why is it a head scratcher for you?
Well, if I was a betting man, I would have told you last summer, that come last fall, that the bread stock market was going to explode.
Yeah.
And I was really anticipating, seeing things of maybe 30 to 50% value in bread stock, pretty much straight across the board. And it did not come to fruition. We added value to them, and we're selling cattle higher than we were before. Yes, I agree with all that, but it didn't have the same kind of explosion that we've seen on the calves, and that's a clear indication that there's not a lot of pressure on at least rebuilding, maybe restocking, but not rebuilding or expanding.
Yeah.
And it's starting. I mean, it's churning. Like, you can watch that thing and you hear some mixed results at times. And like, we had a complete dispersal of a ranch that was on that Corn Belt Classic, and the bread heifers, we had $1,000 variance in prices on some of those lots of bread stock. $1,000 a head variance. I mean, that's a lot of money. That's 30% variance in value, and you just don't see those kind of numbers when you're talking about feeder cattle.
Yeah.
No, and it's because of perceived value and the ability to spread that over 10 years. In the likelihood of a bred animal, 8 or 10 years. But I just thought that we were going to see a higher pressure for young bred cows, bred heifers, young bred cows, young pairs, and there is an increase in the market, but it's not to the level that what I thought, which tells me there's still a lot of upside to come. But there's an opportunity there that's coming, and we can see it, and there's glimpses of it. I'm just amazed at how much variance there is in the value, because I've got some guys asking me, what would it take to find some young cows? And the main answer is, well, I don't know where you're going to find them, but if you do, you're going to have to spit out a number, and when you tell them, they'll be $2,800 to $3,800, and they're like, well, how big? That's an awful big variance, and that's just the reality. I don't know.
Yeah. You know what was a little bit of a head scratcher to me, similar to what you had said. I guess I felt like this bread market was going to come a little bit more unglued this last winter than it did. To me, it almost felt like the best value when you look at the bread market was young cows, heifers, first calf heifers, and that's typically. That was a little bit not normal. That's not what I was expecting, I should say. A lot of times, you figure if you can find some old cows, a lot of guys that try to get in on some of them old cows that have depreciated out and just get a calf or two out of them or whatever, is the values there. But boy, I'll tell you what, them old cows were selling what bred heifers were selling for.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think you're exactly right there. And in general, there's an idea that an old cow that has stayed in the herd is a safe bet, and I get that, but the younger cattle should be better genetics if you're making the right decisions. So you should get more of a factory in the younger one, just because the genetics have advanced, unless you've been making the wrong decisions, so you're right on that. And I still say that of all the classes of cattle that we're selling right now, there's nothing with more value than the bred stock. Absolutely nothing. And I don't care if you pay $3,900 for them heifers that were out there. If we stay in a market relative of what we are today, that heifer makes sense, especially when you consider cull cow prices. We're selling cull cattle for, like, I saw numbers come out roughly 70% above where we were a year ago. 70%. That's out. I mean, I can remember selling cull cows with a 20 cent number in front of them, and here we are. I heard some
adding
guys
$1 to it.
$1, $1.50, $1.60. And I'm like, what? But you look at some of these calf prices, and we're selling. The old rule of thumb on bread stock, like what that everybody says is somewhere like 2 to 2.5 times the value of a steer. Well, you look at some of these steers, and they're $1,700-$1,800 balling calves. You're seeing some of those reports. That's not uncommon. That's a really good number, but it's not an uncommon number. Well, 2 times that's $3,600. 2.5 times that's $4,500.
Yeah.
Plus I get $1 whatever for the weigh up cow if it falls. I mean, there's no better return on your money right now than bred stock. And granted, that's assuming that we're going to stay in this market, calf market, for enough years to pay for that. But I mean, there's a lot of value there, a whole lot of value. And the reason I bring that up is to reiterate that where I think there is still upside in the value of these bred animals, because if two times the steer price is traditionally a number, we're not there on a consistent basis right now. So, I mean, I can easily see that we could put another 10, 15, 20% of value in whatever number you're seeing on bred stock in your area as we move into the fall. Without a doubt, I can see that. I don't know how we won't do that, if you want to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. Clint, you already answered my next question, which was, what do you think the best value? So we'll skip that one. As we start to wind down a little bit of our conversation here, I guess my thought would be, as you are traveling the country, you're talking to producers, feeders, you're a feeder yourself, and some of those things, and cattle owner yourself. Do you have any concerns? We're fighting the bird flu situation in our market right now a little bit. Any concerns or things that we just need to kind of be aware of that you're hearing?
Not specific on, we've all heard the rumblings of the bird flu, but I think that's pretty much gone by the wayside. If it was going to hit us and really drastically affect the market, I think it would have done it right out of the get-go. And now it's malign and
old news.
Right. I don't think, and I think it's proven that it's not going to cause deaths in humans or anything else. I mean, that's not, I don't see that being a real issue. We could have something happen and it, shoot the board down limit, but I just don't see that wrecking the market. This is not a COVID deal by any means. Probably if you want to ask me what my biggest concern would be, and I think we can all relate to this. So if we stop talking about cattle for just a second and we start talking about beef.
Okay.
Probably my biggest concern is I don't think any of us out here in rural America, working class folks, that don't agree that the economy is a little bit of a struggle. The average working class families, their cost of living throughout the year on basic needs has went up. There's without a doubt, I'm not being political, I'm just saying there's without a doubt, we've got, due to inflation and what we're facing and interest rates and all that, it costs more to live. And we're selling box beef at as high a value as we ever have, higher than, at record levels at times right here. And my only fear is, about 80% of our product stays domestic and 20% is exported. That's not true on every single product, but in general, that's pretty good round numbers. My only fear is, at what point do we start to price the American consumer out? And I'm not saying price them out like they're not going to eat beef at all, but do we change the meal time from beef 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week into 2, 3, 4 times a week because of the value? Nothing to do with the ridiculousness of climate change or any of that kind of nonsense, but just talking about cost. And that would be my only fear, because I can tell you at the value of these calves, if you run the break evens look at the board where the live cattle market is, they're losing money. Like right now, as sellers, producers, we are getting paid at a value that is not a break even status for a feeder. We sold cattle on that last sale that would be $100, $150 a break even. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's reality, because that's an indication that we're assuming the fat market's going to come to us. For the fat market to come to us, the box beef prices have got to go up. And my only fear that can slow this whole deal is just, where is that price point that the American consumers going to start to have some pushback? And that's just something that we all got to think about. I don't think that changes any of our decisions or management and production decisions, but it is something that's realistic that we need to think about.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I think in the back of everybody's mind, we appreciate where we're at with the cattle market, and you're right, it shouldn't change our management necessarily, but at what point does the consumer start to fall back a little bit? Not only the family consumer, but also the restaurant consumers.
True.
Instead of they go to the menu, and instead of buying what used to be a $36 steak now is a $48 steak, and those kinds of things. So, but all right, well, Clint, appreciate you joining joining us here. We've got a couple sales coming up next month. Talk about that just real quick.
Yeah. Week in the Rockies is 8th through the 12th. That deadline is the 27th. And on the Superior system, about every 3 weeks, we have a big sale. So the first full week in July, we have a big sale. 3 weeks later, we're going to have the Video Royale, which is the last week of July, first week of August. And 3 weeks after that, we'll have the Bighorn Classic in Sheridan the third week of August. And then 3 weeks after that, we'll have the Labor Day sale based out of our headquarters there in Hudson Oaks. But you can go online to superiorlivestock.com. You can find our market reports archived on there. You can find our video schedules as well as the deadlines for when the consignment deadlines are and the video deadlines are for those. There's a lot of information on there. Reach out. Give us a holler, contact your local rep, and
you bet.
Be glad to help you any way we can.
And look at that country page. That kind of gives you an idea where things are at, too.
That's right. It's, when the markets are hot, the country page has a lot of work, and we've got a lot of cattle on the country page working right now today.
Yeah. All right. Well, Clint, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
All right. Thank you, Justin.
You bet. And again, that was Clint Berry, representative for Superior Livestock, joining us here today, is getting a little bit more in-depth insight as what this market looked like coming out of that first big video sale, and also just anticipation as we prepare for the rest of these summer markets and into this fall run. It's definitely one of the best markets, like Clint said. It's definitely the highest market we've ever seen in our cattle industry. And so I think as we look at that, just something for us as ranchers to be considering as we begin that process. If you haven't already started the process of marketing your calves, be some things you can think about here today that you can pull out of our conversation here today with Clint. Well, stay with us. When we come back, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Hope your summer's going good. You're playing safe out there. Don't take any chances. Keep your head up. And Justin, last episode, you had Ron Scott with Purina on, and you were discussing all the nutritional needs, especially for the heifers. I got a lot out of that program, so folks, go back and listen to that. There was a lot of really good information. Even if you already listened to it, go back and listen to these podcasts again, because you can always get something important out of it the second time around. And what you guys were talking about, I'm going to tell you, after 19 years being chained to this editor's desk, there's the two most important lessons that I have learned personally. They keep repeating themselves over and over again. And you guys did it on that podcast last episode. And that was the nutritional level of our breeding females. And it's just got to be up there, and it pays for itself. It absolutely pays for itself. Everybody tells me that when we're out in the field visiting with folks. Here's what they say. You guys told us to go get a nutritionist and bring them out. So we splurged and got them come out to the outfit, do some feed samples and testing and that sort of thing. Have a look at the cows. And then they come up with a formula that's specific to us. We started feeding it. Yeah, it's a little bit of extra cash outlay at the beginning, but it paid for itself. It brought us from 85% preg rate to 93% in the first year. I hear that all the time. The second thing is genetics, and that's a whole nother topic, of course. But so listen to what these folks are saying, people out there, and get those heifers and cows where they need to be, and you guys will thank your nutritionist for it. Back to you in the booth.
All right, thanks, Captain. And yeah, some great advice last week that we heard on the show, and it really also coincided with the show we had the previous week where we were talking about that elusive second calf, getting that first calf heifer rebred and getting to that second calf point as that propels her into being a very successful cow with longevity. That's a big part of that. So go back and listen to the last 2 weeks of shows. I think you'll find a lot in value in those shows as well as here today. Well, as we turn and take a look at our weather, joining us is he does each and every week, is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as we start full-fledged summer, we can actually start knowing that the days are going to get a little shorter. It's kind of depressing, actually, when you think about it that way.
It really is. Like, it seems like those longest days has come at the wrong time of the year. But yes, we're now into officially summer. And the good news is, yes, we lose a little daylight, but this time of year, it's only a little bit every day.
Well, a little less daylight is a little less heat, too, during the middle of the day. So that's all right.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, as we look ahead for the next 7 to 10 days out, it looks to me like we're just going to kind of see these high and lows kind of moving through, going in and out.
Yeah, as you get into the mature part of summer across North America, what you tend to see happen is you see the establishment of what I'd call a semi-permanent area of high pressure that develops over the southern plains. But what it will do is it'll migrate east and bring hot weather and dry weather to the eastern part of the United States, like just what happened. Everyone, I'm sure, has been hearing about all the hot weather in the Great Lakes in the Northeast. But at times, what that high will do is work its way westward. And what it does is it will go back and forth throughout the course of the summer season. We really see this in July and August. And what that does is the movement of that high sort of is like a regulator in terms of what type of moisture flow can come into the lower 48 states. When the high is more towards the south central and eastern parts of the U.S., that tends to direct the better moisture around that high into the Northwest Corn Belt, parts of the Northern Plains, and parts of the southwestern United States. But as it goes further west, it will then translate to cooler weather in the east and more precipitation over on the other side of the U.S. So we see that back and forth, and we're really starting to see this pattern develop. So this is why you'll have 2 or 3 days of shower and thunderstorm activity, 3 or 4 days where there's not much going on, and then it kind of comes back again. So that regulation of the moisture flow that comes up from the lower latitudes is really dictated by that high. And a lot of times when you get into a summer season, the parts of the U.S. that tend to be more droughty or where those areas of high pressure want to reside the longest and wettest on the edges of that high pressure ridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is there any areas that you're sort of concerned with? I always ask you because I think that's something that just to watch a bit as well.
Well, with the way this high pressure pattern is developing, it does look like it's a good news and bad news. And this usually is always the case.
Yeah.
Where I do see it drier is going to be in the central and eastern Corn Belt. And I do think this may get into parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and northeast Texas. But the way the pattern is evolving, some of the dry areas, like we mentioned at the beginning, West Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, into parts of the central and southern Rockies, it could mean better rain chances in those areas that have been drier. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is you kind of move around where patterns have been persistent over the last 8 weeks are changing a little bit. So we're going to watch right dead center part of the country as a hotter, drier area, at least over the next week or two.
Okay. All right, Don. Well, appreciate the update on our weather, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you then.
And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. If you're like me, it's kind of something you really keep an eye on this time of the year. If you want to find out what he's seeing and what he's looking at, you can catch his daily video podcast. You can find the link to his YouTube channel by going to his website at dayweather.com. We'll take a break. We'll be back after this. Join us next week. Alan Crockett will be our guest. He is a ranch consultant and a business coach. Always a thought-provoking show whenever we have Alan on, so I encourage you to join us on next week's program. By the way, if you do want to get a hold of me, it's pretty simple. You can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. A thank you to our sponsors today of the program, K-Line Irrigation, American Galvy Association, and Cowpuncher Coffee. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded number 1 by America's Ranchers. Be sure to join us next week, same time, same place, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.